Hello. Tonight, we begin with the most fascinating fairy tale. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Three Brothers. There was once upon a time a witch who, in the shape of a hawk, used every night to break the windows of a certain village church. In the same village, there lived three brothers who were all determined to kill the mischievous hawk. But in vain did the two eldest mount guard in the church with their guns. As soon as the bird appeared high above their heads, sleep overpowered them, and they only awoke to hear the windows crashing in. Then the youngest brother took his turn of guarding the windows, and to prevent his being overcome by sleep, he placed a lot of thorns under his chin, so that if he felt drowsy and nodded his head, they would prick him and keep him awake. The moon was already risen, and it was as light as day, when suddenly he heard a fearful noise, and at the same time a terrible desire to sleep overpowered him. His eyelids closed, and his head sank on his shoulders, but the thorns ran into him and were so painful that he awoke at once. He saw the hawk swooping down upon the church, and in a moment he had seized his gun and shot at the bird. The hawk fell heavily under a big stone, severely wounded in its right wing. The youth ran to look at it and saw that a huge abyss had opened below the stone. He went at once to fetch his brothers, and with their help dragged a lot of pine wood and ropes to the spot. They fastened some of the burning pine wood to the end of the rope and let it slowly down to the bottom of the abyss. At first, it was quite dark, and the flaming torch only lit up dirty gray stone walls. But the youngest brother determined to explore the abyss, and letting himself down by the rope, he soon reached the bottom. Here he found a lovely meadow full of green trees and exquisite flowers. In the middle of the meadow stood a huge stone castle with an iron gate leading to it, which was wide open. Everything in the castle seemed to be made of copper, and the only inhabitant he could discover was a lovely girl who was combing her golden hair. And he noticed that whenever one of her hairs fell on the ground, it rang out like pure metal. The youth looked at her more closely and saw that her skin was smooth and fair, her blue eyes bright and sparkling, and her hair as golden as the sun. He fell in love with her on the spot, and kneeling at her feet, he implored her to become his wife. The lovely girl accepted his proposal gladly. But at the same time, she warned him that she could never come up to the world above till her mother, the old witch, was dead. And she went on to tell him that the only way in which the old creature could be killed was with the sword that hung up in the castle. But the sword was so heavy that no one could lift it. Then the youth went into a room in the castle where everything was made of silver. And here he found another beautiful girl, the sister of his bride. She was combing her silver hair, and every hair that fell on the ground rang out like pure metal. The second girl handed him the sword, but though he tried with all his strength, he could not lift it. At last, a third sister came to him and gave him a drop of something to drink, which she said would give him the needful strength. He drank one drop, but still he could not lift the sword. Then he drank a second, and the sword began to move. But only after he had drunk a third drop was he able to swing the sword over his head. Then he hid himself in the castle and awaited the old witch's arrival. At last, as it was beginning to grow dark, she appeared. She swooped down upon a big apple tree, and after shaking some golden apples from it, she pounced down upon the earth. As soon as her feet touched the ground, she became transformed from a hawk into a woman. This was the moment the youth was waiting for, and he swung his mighty sword in the air with all his strength, and the witch's head fell off, and her blood spurted up on the walls. Without fear of any further danger, he packed up all the treasures of the castle into great chests and gave his brothers a signal to pull them up out of the abyss. First, the treasures were attached to the rope, and then the three lovely girls. And now everything was up above, and only he himself remained below. But as he was a little suspicious of his brothers, he fastened a heavy stone onto the rope and let them pull it up. At first, they heaved with a will, but when the stone was halfway up, they let it drop suddenly, and it fell to the bottom, broken into 100 pieces. So that's what would have happened to my bones had I trusted myself to them, said the youth sadly. And he began to cry bitterly, not because of the treasures, but because of the lovely girl with her swan-like neck and golden hair. For a long time, he wandered sadly all through the beautiful underworld. And one day, he met a magician who asked him the cause of his tears. The youth told him all that had befallen him, and the magician said, "Do not grieve, young man. If you will guard the children who are hidden in the golden apple tree, I will bring you at once up to the earth. Another magician who lives in this land always eats my children up. It is in vain that I have hidden them under the earth and locked them into the castle. Now I have hidden them in the apple tree. Hide yourself there too, and at midnight you will see my enemy." The youth climbed up the tree and picked some of the beautiful golden apples, which he ate for his supper. At midnight, the wind began to rise, and a rustling sound was heard at the foot of the tree. The youth looked down and beheld a long, thick serpent beginning to crawl up the tree. It wound itself round the stem and gradually got higher and higher. It stretched its huge head, in which the eyes glittered fiercely, among the branches, searching for the nest in which the little children lay. They trembled with terror when they saw the hideous creature, and hid themselves beneath the leaves. Then the youth swung his mighty sword in the air, and with one blow cut off the serpent's head. He cut up the rest of the body into little bits and strewed them to the four winds. The father of the rescued children was so delighted over the death of his enemy that he told the youth to get on his back, and in this way he carried him up to the world above. With what joy did he hurry now to his brother's house! He burst into a room where they were all assembled, but no one knew who he was. Only his bride, who was serving as cook to her sisters, recognized her lover at once. His brothers, who had quite believed he was dead, yielded him up his treasures at once and flew into the woods in terror. But the good youth forgave them all they had done and divided his treasures with them. Then he built himself a big castle with golden windows, and there he lived happily with his golden-haired wife till the end of their lives. The Boy and the Wolves, or The Broken Promise. Once upon a time, an Indian hunter built himself a house in the middle of a great forest, far away from all his tribe, for his heart was gentle and kind, and he was weary of the treachery and cruel deeds of those who had been his friends. So he left them, and took his wife and 3 children, and they journeyed on until they found a spot near to a clear stream, where they began to cut down trees and to make ready their wigwam. For many years they lived peacefully and happily in this sheltered place, never leaving it except to hunt the wild animals, which served them both for food and clothes. At last, however, the strong man felt sick, and before long he knew he must die. So he gathered his family round him and said his last words to them. "You, my wife, the companion of my days, will follow me ere many moons have waned to the island of the blessed. But for you, O my children, whose lives are but newly begun, the wickedness, unkindness, and ingratitude from which I fled are before you. Yet I shall go hence in peace, my children, if you will promise always to love each other, and never to forsake your youngest brother." "Never," they replied, holding out their hands. And the hunter died content. Scarcely 8 moons had passed when, just as he had said, the wife went forth and followed her husband. But before leaving her children, she bade the 2 elder ones think of their promise never to forsake the younger, for he was a child and weak. And while the snow lay thick upon the ground, they tended him and cherished him. But when the earth showed green again, the heart of the young man stirred within him, and he longed to see the wigwams of the village where his father's youth was spent. Therefore he opened all his heart to his sister, who answered, "My brother, I understand your longing for our fellow men, whom here we cannot see. But remember our father's words. Shall we not seek our own pleasures and forget the little one?" But he wouldn't listen, and making no reply, he took his bow and arrows and left the hut. The snows fell and melted, yet he never returned. And at last the heart of the girl grew cold and hard, and her little boy became a burden in her eyes, till one day she spoke thus to him, "See, there is food for many days to come. Stay here within the shelter of the hut. I go to seek our brother, and when I have found him, I shall return hither." But when, after hard journeying, she reached the village where her brother dwelt, and saw that he had a wife and was happy, and when she, too, was sought by a young brave, then she also forgot the boy alone in the forest, and thought only of her husband. Now, as soon as the little boy had eaten all the food which his sister had left him, he went out into the woods and gathered berries and dug up roots. And while the sun shone, he was contented and had his fill. But when the snows began and the wind howled, then his stomach felt empty and his limbs cold, and he hid in trees all the night, and only crept out to eat what the wolves had left behind. And by, having no other friends, he sought their company, and sat by while they devoured their prey. And they grew to know him, and gave him food. And without them, he would have died in the snow. But at last the snows melted, and the ice upon the great lake. And as the wolves went down to the shore, the boy went after them. And it happened one day that his big brother was fishing in his canoe near the shore, and he heard the voice of a child singing in the Indian tone, my brother, I am becoming a wolf. I am becoming a wolf." And when he had so sung, he howled, as wolves howl. Then the heart of the elder sunk, and he hastened towards him, crying, "Brother, little brother, come to me." But he, being half a wolf, only continued his song. And the louder the elder called him, "Brother, "Little brother, come to me." The swifter he fled after his brothers the wolves, and the heavier grew his skin, till, with a long howl, he vanished into the depths of the forest. So, with shame and anguish in his soul, the elder brother went back to his village, and with his sister mourned the little boy and the broken promise till the end of his life. The Glass Axe. There was once upon a time a king and queen who had everything they could possibly wish for in this world, except a child. At last, after 12 years, the queen gave birth to a son, but she did not live long to enjoy her happiness, for on the following day she died. But before her death, she called her husband to her and said, "Never let the child put his feet on the ground, for as soon as he does so, he will fall into the power of a wicked fairy, who will do him much harm." And these were the last words the poor queen spoke. The boy throve and grew big, and when he was too heavy for his nurse to carry, a chair was made for him on little wheels, in which he could wander through the palace gardens without help. At other times, he was carried about on a litter, and he was always carefully watched and guarded, for fear he should at any time put his feet to the ground. But as this sort of life was bad for his health, the doctors ordered him horse exercise, and he soon became a first-rate rider, and used to go out for long excursions on horseback, accompanied always by his father's stud groom and a numerous retinue. Every day he rode through the neighboring fields and woods, and always returned home in the evening, safe and well. In this way, many years passed, and the prince grew to manhood, and hardly anyone remembered the queen's warning, though precautions were still taken, more from use and wont than for any other reason. One day, the prince and his suite went out for a ride in a wood, where his father sometimes held a hunt. Their way led through a stream whose banks were overgrown with thick brushwood. Just as the horsemen were about to ford the river, a hare, startled by the sound of the horse's hoofs, started up from the grass and ran towards the thicket. The young prince pursued the little creature and had almost overtaken it, when the girth of his saddle suddenly broke in two, and he fell heavily to the ground. No sooner had his foot touched the earth than he disappeared before the eyes of the horrified courtiers. They sought for him far and near, but all in vain, and they were forced to recognize the power of the evil fairy, against which the queen had warned them on her deathbed. The old king was much grieved when they brought him the news of his son's disappearance, but as he could do nothing to free him from his fate, he gave himself up to an old age of grief and loneliness, cherishing at the same time the hope that some lucky chance might one day deliver the youth out of the hands of his enemy. Hardly had the prince touched the ground than he felt himself violently seized by an unseen power, and hurried away he knew not whither. A whole new world stretched out before him, quite unlike the one he had left. A splendid castle surrounded by a huge lake was the abode of the fairy, and the only approach to it was over a bridge of clouds. On the other side of the lake, high mountains rose up, and dark woods stretched along the banks. Over all hung a thick mist, and deep silence reigned everywhere. No sooner had the fairy reached her own domain than she made herself visible, and turning to the prince, she told him that unless he obeyed all her commands, down to the minutest detail, he would be severely punished. Then she gave him an axe made of glass, and bade him cross the bridge of clouds and go into the wood beyond and cut down all the trees there before sunset. At the same time, she cautioned him with many angry words against speaking to a black girl he would most likely meet in the wood. The prince listened to her words meekly, and when she had finished, took up the glass axe and set out for the forest. At every step, he seemed to sink into the clouds, but fear gave wings to his feet, and he crossed the lake in safety and set to work at once. But no sooner had he struck the first blow with his axe than it broke into 1,000 pieces against the tree. The poor youth was so terrified he did not know what to do, for he was in mortal dread of the punishment the wicked old fairy would inflict on him. He wandered to and fro in the wood, not knowing where he was going, and at last, worn out by fatigue and misery, he sank on the ground and fell fast asleep. He did not know how long he had slept when a sudden sound awoke him, and opening his eyes, he saw a black girl standing beside him. Mindful of the fairy's warning, he did not dare to address her, but she on her part greeted him in the most friendly manner, and asked him at once if he were under the power of the wicked fairy. The prince nodded his head silently in answer. Then the black girl told him that she too was in the power of the fairy, who had doomed her to wander about in her present guise until some youth should take pity on her and bear her in safety to the other side of the river, which they saw in the distance, and on the other side of which the fairy's domain and power ended. The girl's words so inspired the prince with confidence that he told her all his tale of woe, and ended up by asking her advice as to how he was to escape the punishment the fairy would be sure to inflict on him when she discovered that he had not cut down the trees in the wood, and that he had broken her axe. "You must know," answered the black girl, "that the fairy in whose power we both are is my own mother. But you must not betray this secret, for it would cost me my life. If you will only promise to try and free me, I will stand by you and will accomplish for you all the tasks which my mother sets you." The prince promised joyfully all she asked. Then, having once more warned him not to betray her confidence, she handed him a draught to drink, which very soon sunk his senses in a deep slumber. His astonishment was great when he awoke to find the glass axe whole and unbroken at his side, and all the trees of the wood lying felled around him. He made all haste across the bridge of clouds and told the fairy that her commands were obeyed. She was much amazed when she heard that all the wood was cut down, and saw the axe unbroken in his hand. And since she could not believe that he had done all this by himself, she questioned him narrowly if he had seen or spoken to the black girl. But the prince lied manfully and swore he had never looked up from his work for a moment. Seeing she could get nothing more out of him, she gave him a little bread and water, and showing him to a small dark cupboard, she told him he might sleep there. Morning had hardly dawned when the fairy awoke the prince, and giving him the glass axe again, she told him to cut up all the wood he had felled the day before, and to put it in bundles ready for firewood. At the same time, she warned him once more against approaching or speaking a word to the black girl if he met her in the wood. Although his task was no easier than that of the day before, the youth set out much more cheerfully, because he knew he could count on the help of the black girl. With quicker and lighter step, he crossed the bridge of clouds, and hardly had he reached the other side than his friend stood before him and greeted him cheerfully. When she heard what the fairy demanded this time, she answered smilingly, "Never fear," and handed him another draught, which very soon caused the prince to sink into a deep sleep. When he awoke, everything was done. All the trees of the wood were cut up into firewood and arranged in bundles, ready for use. He returned to the castle as quickly as he could, and told the fairy that her commands were obeyed. She was even more amazed than she had been before, and asked him again if he had either seen or spoken to the black girl. But the prince knew better than to betray his word, and once more lied freely. On the following day, the fairy set him a third task to do, even harder than the other two. She told him he must build a castle on the other side of the lake, made of nothing but gold, silver, and precious stones. And unless he could accomplish this within an hour, the most frightful doom awaited him. The prince heard her words without anxiety. So entirely did he rely on the help of his black friend. Full of hope, he hurried across the bridge and recognized at once the spot where the castle was to stand. For spades, hammers, axes, and every other building implement lay scattered on the ground, ready for the workman's hand. But of gold, silver, and precious stones there was not a sign. But before the prince had time to feel despondent, the black girl beckoned to him in the distance from behind a rock, where she had hidden herself for fear her mother should catch sight of her. Full of joy, the youth hurried towards her and begged her aid and counsel in the new piece of work he had been given to do. But this time, the fairy had watched the prince's movements from her window, and she saw him hiding himself behind the rock with her daughter. She uttered a piercing shriek so that the mountains re-echoed with the sound of it, and the terrified pair had hardly dared to look out from their hiding place when the enraged woman, with her dress and hair flying in the wind, hurried over the bridge of clouds. The prince at once gave himself up for lost, but the girl told him to be of good courage and to follow her as quickly as he could. But before they left their shelter, she broke off a little bit of the rock, spoke some magic words over it, and threw it in the direction her mother was coming from. In a moment, a glittering palace arose before the eyes of the fairy, which blinded her with its dazzling splendor, and with its many doors and passages prevented her for some time from finding her way out of it. In the meantime, the black girl hurried on with the prince, hastening to reach the river, where once on the other side they would forever be out of the wicked fairy's power. But before they had accomplished half the way, they heard again the rustle of her garments and her muttered curses pursuing them closely. The prince was terrified. He dared not look back, and he felt his strength giving way. But before he had time to despair, the girl uttered some more magic words, and immediately she herself was changed into a pond, and the prince into a duck swimming on its surface. When the fairy saw this, her rage knew no bounds, and she used all her magic wits to make the pond disappear. She caused a hill of sand to arise at her feet, meaning it to dry up the water at once. But the sand hill only drove the pond a little farther away, and its waters seemed to increase instead of diminishing. When the old woman saw that the powers of her magic were of so little avail, she had recourse to cunning. She threw a lot of gold nuts into the pond, hoping in this way to catch the duck. But all her efforts were fruitless, for the little creature refused to let itself be caught. Then a new idea struck the wicked old woman, and hiding herself behind the rock which had sheltered the fugitives, she waited behind it, watching carefully for the moment when the prince and her daughter should resume their natural forms and continue their journey. She had not to wait long, for as soon as the girl thought her mother was safely out of the way, she changed herself and the prince once more into their human shape, and set out cheerfully for the river. But they had not gone many steps when the wicked fairy hurried after them, a drawn dagger in her hand, and was close upon them, when suddenly, instead of the prince and her daughter, she found herself in front of a great stone church, whose entrance was carefully guarded by a huge monk. Breathless with rage and passion, she tried to plunge her dagger into the monk's heart, but it fell shattered in pieces at her feet. In her desperation, she determined to pull down the church, and thus to destroy her two victims forever. She stamped 3 times on the ground, and the earth trembled, and both the church and the monk began to shake. As soon as the fairy saw this, she retreated to some distance from the building, so as not to be hurt herself by its fall. But once more, her scheme was doomed to failure. For hardly had she gone a yard from the church, then both it and the monk disappeared, and she found herself in a wood black as night, and full of wolves and bears and wild animals of all sorts and descriptions. Then her wrath gave place to terror, for she feared every moment to be torn in pieces by the beasts who, one and all, seemed to defy her power. She thought it wisest to make her way as best she could out of the forest, and then to pursue the fugitives once more and accomplish their destruction, either by force or cunning. In the meantime, the prince and the black girl had again assumed their natural forms and were hurrying on as fast as they could to reach the river. But when they got there, they found that there was no way in which they could cross it, and the girl's magic art seemed no longer to have any power. Then, turning to the prince, she said, "The hour for my deliverance has not yet come, but as you promised to do all you could to free me, you must do exactly as I bid you now. Take this bow and arrow, and kill every beast you see with them. And be sure you spare no living creature." With these words, she disappeared. And hardly had she done so, than a huge wild boar started out of the thicket near and made straight for the prince. But the youth did not lose his presence of mind, and drawing his bow, he pierced the beast with his arrow right through the skull. The creature fell heavily on the ground, and out of its side sprang a little hare, which ran like the wind along the river bank. The prince drew his bow once more, and the hare lay dead at his feet. But at the same moment, a dove rose up in the air and circled round the prince's head in the most confiding manner. But mindful of the black girl's commands, he dared not spare the little creature's life, and taking another arrow from his quiver, he laid it as dead as the boar and the hare. But when he went to look at the body of the bird, he found, instead of the dove, a round white egg lying on the ground. While he was gazing on it and wondering what it could mean, he heard the sweeping of wings above him, and looking up, he saw a huge vulture with open claws swooping down upon him. In a moment, he seized the egg and flung it at the bird with all his might. And lo and behold, instead of the ugly monster, the most beautiful girl he had ever seen stood before the astonished eyes of the prince. But while all this was going on, the wicked old fairy had managed to make her way out of the wood and was now using the last resource in her power to overtake her daughter and the prince. As soon as she was in the open again, she mounted her chariot, which was drawn by a fiery dragon, and flew through the air in it. But just as she got to the river, she saw the two lovers in each other's arms swimming through the water as easily as two fishes. Quick as lightning and forgetful of every danger, she flew down upon them. But the waters seized her chariot and sunk it in the lowest depths, and the waves bore the wicked old woman down the stream till she was caught in some thorn bushes, where she made a good meal for all the little fishes that were swimming about. And so at last the prince and his lovely bride were free. They hurried as quickly as they could to the old king, who received them with joy and gladness. On the following day, a most gorgeous wedding feast was held, and as far as we know, the prince and his bride lived happily forever afterwards. The Dead Wife. Once upon a time, there were a man and his wife who lived in the forest, very far from the rest of the tribe. Very often they spent the day in hunting together, but after a while, the wife found that she had so many things to do that she was obliged to stay at home. So he went alone, though he found that when his wife was not with him, he never had any luck. One day, when he was away hunting, the woman fell ill, and in a few days she died. Her husband grieved bitterly and buried her in the house where she had passed her life. But as the time went on, he felt so lonely without her that he made a wooden doll about her height and size for company, and dressed it in her clothes. He seated it in front of the fire and tried to think he had his wife back again. The next day, he went out to hunt, and when he came home, the first thing he did was to go up to the doll and brush off some of the ashes from the fire which had fallen on its face. But he was very busy now, for he had to cook and mend, besides getting food, for there was no one to help him. And so a whole year passed away. At the end of that time, he came back from hunting one night and found some wood by the door and a fire within. The next night, there was not only wood and fire, but a piece of meat in the kettle, nearly ready for eating. He searched all about to see who could have done this, but could find no one. The next time he went to hunt, he took care not to go far, and came in quite early. And while he was still a long way off, he saw a woman going into the house with wood on her shoulders. So he made haste and opened the door quickly. And instead of the wooden doll, his wife sat in front of the fire. Then she spoke to him and said, "The Great Spirit felt sorry for you, because you would not be comforted. So he let me come back to you. But you must not stretch out your hand to touch me till we have seen the rest of our people. If you do, I shall die." Bedtime. So the man listened to her words, and the woman dwelt there, and brought the wood, and kindled the fire, till one day her husband said to her, "It is now 2 years since you died. Let us now go back to our tribe. Then you will be well, and I can touch you." And with that, he prepared food for the journey, a string of deer's flesh for her to carry, and one for himself. And so they started. Now, the camp of the tribe was distant 6 days' journey, and when they were yet 1 day's journey off, it began to snow, and they felt weary and longed for rest. Therefore, they made a fire, cooked some food, and spread out their skins to sleep. Then the heart of the man was greatly stirred, and he stretched out his arms to his wife, but she waved her hands and said, "We have seen no one yet. It is too soon." But he would not listen to her, and caught her to him. And behold, he was clasping the wooden doll, and when he saw it was the doll, he pushed it from him in his misery, and rushed away to the camp, and told them all his story. And some doubted, and they went back with him to the place where he and his wife had stopped to rest. And there lay the doll, and besides, they saw in the snow the steps of 2 people, and the foot of one was like the foot of the doll. And the man grieved sore all the days of his life. In the land of souls. Far away in North America, where the Red Indians dwell, there lived a long time ago a beautiful maiden who was lovelier than any other girl in the whole tribe. Many of the young braves sought her in marriage, but she would listen to one only, a handsome chief who had taken her fancy some years before. So they were to be married, and great rejoicings were made, and the two looked forward to a long life of happiness together. When the very night before the wedding feast, a sudden illness seized the girl, and without a word to her friends who were weeping round her, she passed silently away. The heart of her lover had been set upon her, and the thought of her remained with him night and day. He put aside his bow and went neither to fight nor to hunt, but from sunrise to sunset he sat by the place where she was laid, thinking of his happiness that was buried there. At last, after many days, a light seemed to come to him out of the darkness. He remembered having heard from the old people of the tribe that there was a path that led to the land of souls, that if you sought carefully, you could find it. So the next morning, he got up early and put some food in his pouch and slung an extra skin over his shoulders, for he knew not how long his journey would take, nor what sort of country he would have to go through. Only one thing he knew, that if the path was there, he would find it. At first, he was puzzled, as there seemed no reason he should go in one direction more than another. Then, all at once, he thought he had heard one of the old men say that the land of souls lay to the south, and so, filled with new hope and courage, he set his face southwards. For many, many miles, the country looked the same as it did round his own home. The forests, the hills, and the rivers all seemed exactly like the ones he had left. The only thing that was different was the snow, which had lain thick upon the hills and trees when he started, but grew less and less the farther he went south, till it disappeared altogether. Soon the trees put forth their buds, and flowers sprang up under his feet, and instead of thick clouds, there was blue sky over his head, and everywhere the birds were singing. Then he knew that he was in the right road. The thought that he should soon behold his lost bride made his heart beat for joy, and he sped along lightly and swiftly. Now his way led through a dark wood, and then over some steep cliffs, and on the top of these he found a hut or wigwam. An old man clothed in skins and holding a staff in his hand stood in the doorway. And he said to the young chief, who was beginning to tell his story, "I was waiting for you. Wherefore you have come, I know. It is but a short while since she whom you seek was here. Rest in my hut, as she also rested, and I will tell you what you ask, and whither you should go." On hearing these words, the young man entered the hut, but his heart was too eager within him to suffer him to rest. And when he arose, the old man rose too, and stood with him at the door. "Look," he said, "at the water which lies far out yonder, and the plains which stretch beyond. That is the land of souls, but no man enters it without leaving his body behind him. So lay down your body here, your bow and arrows, your skin, and your dog. They shall be kept for you safely." Then he turned away, and the young chief, light as air, seemed hardly to touch the ground, and as he flew along, the scents grew sweeter and the flowers more beautiful, while the animals rubbed their noses against him instead of hiding as he approached, and birds circled round him, and fishes lifted up their heads and looked as he went by. Very soon he noticed with wonder that neither rocks nor trees barred his path. He passed through them without knowing it, for indeed they were not rocks and trees at all, but only the souls of them, for this was the land of shadows. So he went on with winged feet till he came to the shores of a great lake, with a lovely island in the middle of it, while on the bank of the lake was a canoe of glittering stone, and in the canoe were 2 shining paddles. The chief jumped straight into the canoe, and seizing the paddles, pushed off from the shore, when, to his joy and wonder, he saw following him in another canoe exactly like his own, the maiden for whose sake he had made this long journey. But they could not touch each other, for between them rolled great waves, which looked as if they would sink the boats, yet never did, and the young man and the maiden shrank with fear. For down in the depths of the water they saw the bones of those who had died before, and in the waves themselves men and women were struggling, and but few passed over. Only the children had no fear, and reached the other side in safety. Still, though the chief and the young girl quailed in terror at these horrible sights and sounds, no harm came to them, for their lives had been free from evil, and the Master of Life had said that no evil should happen unto them. So they reached unhurt the shore of the happy island, and wandered through the flowery fields and by the banks of rushing streams, and they knew not hunger nor thirst, neither cold nor heat. The air fed them, and the salts warmed them, and they forgot the dead, for they saw no graves. And the young man's thoughts turned not to wars, neither to the hunting of animals, and gladly would these 2 have walked thus forever. But in the murmur of the wind he heard the Master of Life saying to him, "Return whither you came, for I have work for you to do, and your people need you, and for many years you shall rule over them. At the gate my messenger awaits you, and you shall take again your body which you left behind, and he will show you what you are to do. Listen to him, and have patience, and in time to come you shall rejoin her whom you must now leave, for she is accepted, and will remain ever young and beautiful, as when I called her hence from the land of snows." The White Duck. Once upon a time, a great and powerful king married a lovely princess. No couple were ever so happy. But before their honeymoon was over, they were forced to part, for the king had to go on a yearly expedition to a far country, and leave his young wife alone at home. Bitter were the tears she shed, while her husband sought in vain to soothe her with words of comfort and counsel, warning her, above all things, never to leave the castle, to hold no intercourse with strangers, to beware of evil counselors, and especially to be on her guard against strange women. And the queen promised faithfully to obey her royal lord and master in these 4 matters. So when the king set out on his expedition, she shut herself up with her ladies in her own apartments, and spent her time in spinning and weaving, and in thinking of her royal husband. Often she was very sad and lonely, and it happened that one day, while she was seated at the window, letting salt tears drop on her work, an old woman, a kind, homely-looking old body, stepped up to the window and, leaning upon her crutch, addressed the queen in friendly, flattering tones, saying, "Why are you sad and cast down, fair queen? You should not mope all day in your rooms, but should come out into the green garden and hear the birds sing with joy among the trees, and see the butterflies fluttering above the flowers, and hear the bees and insects hum, and watch the sunbeams chase the dewdrops through the rose leaves and in the lily cups. All the brightness outside would help to drive away your cares, O queen." For long the queen resisted her coaxing words, remembering the promise she had given the king, her husband. But at last she thought to herself, "After all, what harm would it do if I were to go into the garden for a short time and enjoy myself among the trees and flowers, and the singing birds and fluttering butterflies and humming insects, and look at the dewdrops hiding from the sunbeams in the hearts of the roses and lilies, and wander about in the sunshine, instead of remaining all day in this room?" For she had no idea that the kind-looking old woman, leaning on her crutch, was in reality a wicked witch who envied the queen her good fortune and was determined to ruin her. And so, in all ignorance, the queen followed her out into the garden and listened to her smooth, flattering words. Now, in the middle of the garden, there was a pond of water, clear as crystal, and the old woman said to the queen, "The day is so warm, and the sun's rays so scorching that the water in the pond looks very cool and inviting. Would you not like to bathe in it, fair queen?" "No, I think not," answered the queen. But the next moment she regretted her words and thought to herself, "Why shouldn't I bathe in that cool, fresh water? No harm could come of it." And, so saying, she slipped off her robes and stepped into the water. But scarcely had her tender feet touched the cool ripples when she felt a great shove on her shoulders, and the wicked witch had pushed her into the deep water, exclaiming, "Swim henceforth, white duck." And the witch herself assumed the form of the queen, and decked herself out in the royal robes, and sat among the court ladies, awaiting the king's return. And suddenly the tramp of horses' hoofs was heard, and the barking of dogs, and the witch hastened forward to meet the royal carriages, and throwing her arms round the king's neck, kissed him. And in his great joy, the king did not know that the woman he held in his arms was not his own dear wife, but a wicked witch. In the meantime, outside the palace walls, the poor white duck swam up and down the pond, and near it laid 3 eggs, out of which there came one morning 2 little fluffy ducklings and a little ugly drake. And the white duck brought the little creatures up, and they paddled after her in the pond, and caught goldfish, and hopped upon the bank, and waddled about, ruffling their feathers, and saying, "Quack, quack," as they strutted about on the green banks of the pond. But their mother used to warn them not to stray too far, telling them that a wicked witch lived in the castle beyond the garden, adding, "She has ruined me, and she will do her best to ruin you." But the young ones did not listen to their mother, and playing about the garden one day, they strayed close up to the castle windows. The witch at once recognized them by their smell and ground her teeth with anger. But she hid her feelings, and pretending to be very kind, she called them to her and joked with them, and led them into a beautiful room where she gave them food to eat, and showed them a soft cushion on which they might sleep. Then she left them and went down into the palace kitchens, where she told the servants to sharpen the knives and to make a great fire ready, and hang a large kettleful of water over it. In the meantime, the 2 little ducklings had fallen asleep, and the little drake lay between them, covered up by their wings, to be kept warm under their feathers. But the little drake could not go to sleep, and as he lay there wide awake in the night, he heard the witch come to the door and say, "Little ones, are you asleep?" And the little drake answered for the other 2, "We cannot sleep. We wake and weep. Sharp is the knife to take our life. The fire is hot, now boils the pot. And so we wake and lie and quake." "They are not asleep yet," muttered the witch to herself. And she walked up and down in the passage, and then came back to the door and said, "Little ones, are you asleep?" And again the little drake answered for his sisters, "We cannot sleep. We wake and weep. Sharp is the knife to take our life. The fire is hot, now boils the pot. And so we wake and lie and quake." "Just the same answer," muttered the witch. "I think I'll go in and see." So she opened the door gently, and seeing the 2 little ducklings sound asleep, she there and then killed them The next morning, the white duck wandered round the pond in a distracted manner, looking for her little ones. She called and she searched, but could find no trace of them. And in her heart she had a foreboding that evil had befallen them. And she fluttered up out of the water and flew to the palace. And there, laid out on the marble floor of the court, dead and stone cold, were her 3 children. The white duck threw herself upon them, and covering up their little bodies with her wings, she cried, "Quack, quack, my little loves. Quack, quack, my turtle doves. I brought you up with grief and pain, and now before my eyes you're slain. I gave you always of the best. I kept you warm in my soft nest. I loved and watched you day and night. You were my joy, my one delight." The king heard the sad complaint of the white duck and called to the witch, "Wife, what a wonder is this? Listen to that white duck." But the witch answered, "My dear husband, what do you mean? There is nothing wonderful in a duck's quacking. Here, servants, chase that duck out of the courtyard." But though the servants chased and chevied, they could not get rid of the duck, for she circled round and always came back to the spot where her children lay, crying, "Quack, quack, my little loves. Quack, quack, my turtle doves. The wicked witch your lives did take. The wicked witch, the cunning snake. First she stole my king away. Then my children did she slay. Changed me from a happy wife to a duck for all my life. Would I were the queen again. Would that you had never been slain." And as the king heard her words, he began to suspect that he had been deceived. And he called out to the servants, "Catch that duck and bring it here." But though they ran to and fro, the duck always fled past them and would not let herself be caught. So the king himself stepped down amongst them, and instantly the duck fluttered down into his hands. And as he stroked her wings, she was changed into a beautiful woman, and he recognized his dear wife. And she told him that a bottle would be found in her nest in the garden, containing some drops from the spring of healing. And it was brought to her, and the ducklings and little drake were sprinkled with the water, and from the little dead bodies 3 lovely children arose. And the king and queen were overjoyed when they saw their children, and they all lived happily together in the beautiful palace. But the wicked witch was taken by the king's command, and she came to no good end. The Witch and Her Servants. Long time ago there lived a king who had 3 sons. The eldest was called Sabo, the second Warza, and the youngest Iwanich. One beautiful spring morning, the king was walking through his gardens with these 3 sons, gazing with admiration at the various fruit trees, some of which were a mass of blossom, whilst others were bowed to the ground, laden with rich fruit. During their wanderings, they came unperceived on a piece of wasteland where 3 splendid trees grew. The king looked on them for a moment, and then, shaking his head sadly, he passed on in silence. The sons, who could not understand why he did this, asked him the reason of his dejection, and the king told them as follows: "These 3 trees, which I cannot see without sorrow, were planted by me on this spot when I was a youth of 20. A celebrated magician, who had given the seed to my father, promised him that they would grow into the 3 finest trees the world had ever seen. My father did not live to see his words come true, but on his deathbed, he bade me transplant them here, and to look after them with the greatest care, which I accordingly did. At last, after the lapse of 5 long years, I noticed some blossoms on the branches, and a few days later, the most exquisite fruit my eyes had ever seen. I gave my head gardener the strictest orders to watch the trees carefully, for the magician had warned my father that if one unripe fruit were plucked from the tree, all the rest would become rotten at once. When it was quite ripe, the fruit would become a golden yellow. Every day I gazed on the lovely fruit, which became gradually more and more tempting looking, and it was all I could do not to break the magician's commands. One night, I dreamt that the fruit was perfectly ripe. I ate some of it, and it was more delicious than anything I had ever tasted in real life. As soon as I awoke, I sent for the gardener and asked him if the fruit on the 3 trees had not ripened in the night to perfection. But instead of replying, the gardener threw himself at my feet and swore that he was innocent. He said that he had watched by the trees all night, but in spite of it, and as if by magic, the beautiful trees had been robbed of all their fruit. Grieved as I was over the theft, I did not punish the gardener, of whose fidelity I was well assured, but I determined to pluck off all the fruit in the following year before it was ripe, as I had not much belief in the magician's warning. I carried out my intention and had all the fruit picked off the tree, but when I tasted one of the apples, it was bitter and unpleasant, and the next morning the rest of the fruit had all rotted away. After this, I had the beautiful fruit of these trees carefully guarded by my most faithful servants. But every year, on this very night, the fruit was plucked and stolen by an invisible hand, and next morning, not a single apple remained on the trees. For some time past, I have given up even having the trees watched." When the king had finished his story, Sabo, his eldest son, said to him, "Forgive me, father. If I say I think you are mistaken, I am sure there are many men in your kingdom who could protect these trees from the cunning arts of a thieving magician. I myself, who as your eldest son claim the first right to do so, will mount guard over the fruit this very night." The king consented, and as soon as evening drew on, Sabo climbed up onto one of the trees, determined to protect the fruit, even if it cost him his life. So he kept watch half the night, but a little after midnight, he was overcome by an irresistible drowsiness and fell fast asleep. He did not awake till it was bright daylight, and all the fruit on the trees had vanished. The following year, Warza, the second brother, tried his luck, but with the same result. Then it came to the turn of the third and youngest son. Iwanich was not the least discouraged by the failure of his elder brothers, though they were both much older and stronger than he was. And when night came, climbed up the tree as they had done. The moon had risen, and with her soft light lit up the whole neighborhood, so that the observant prince could distinguish the smallest object distinctly. At midnight, a gentle west wind shook the tree, and at the same moment, a snow-white, swan-like bird sank down gently on his breast. The prince hastily seized the bird's wings in his hands, when, lo, to his astonishment, he found he was holding in his arms not a bird, but the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. "You need not fear, Militza," said the beautiful girl, looking at the prince with friendly eyes. "An evil magician has not robbed you of your fruit, but he stole the seed from my mother, and thereby caused her death. When she was dying, she bade me take the fruit, which you have no right to possess, from the trees every year as soon as it was ripe. This I would have done tonight too, if you had not seized me with such force, and so broken the spell I was under." Iwanich, who had been prepared to meet a terrible magician and not a lovely girl, fell desperately in love with her. They spent the rest of the night in pleasant conversation, and when Militza wished to go away, he begged her not to leave him. "I would gladly stay with you longer," said Militza, "but a wicked witch once cut off a lock of my hair when I was asleep, which has put me in her power. And if morning were still to find me here, she would do me some harm. And you, too, perhaps." Having said these words, she drew a sparkling diamond ring from her finger, which she handed to the prince, saying, "Keep this ring in memory of Militza, and think of her sometimes, if you never see her again. But if your love is really true, come and find me in my own kingdom. I may not show you the way there, but this ring will guide you. If you have love and courage enough to undertake this journey, whenever you come to a crossroad, always look at this diamond before you settle which way you are going to take. If it sparkles as brightly as ever, go straight on. But if its luster is dimmed, choose another path. Then Milica bent over the prince and kissed him on his forehead. And before he had time to say a word, she vanished through the branches of the tree in a little white cloud. Morning broke, and the prince, still full of the wonderful apparition, left his perch and returned to the palace like one in a dream, without even knowing if the fruit had been taken or not, for his whole mind was absorbed by thoughts of Milica and how he was to find her. As soon as the head gardener saw the prince going towards the palace, he ran to the trees, and when he saw them laden with ripe fruit, he hastened to tell the king the joyful news. The king was beside himself for joy, and hurried at once to the garden, and made the gardener pick him some of the fruit. He tasted it, and found the apple quite as luscious as it had been in his dream. He went at once to his son Iwanich, and after embracing him tenderly and heaping praises on him, he asked him how he had succeeded in protecting the costly fruit from the power of the magician. This question placed Iwanich in a dilemma, but as he did not want the real story to be known, he said that about midnight, a huge wasp had flown through the branches and buzzed incessantly round him. He had warded it off with his sword, and at dawn, when he was becoming quite worn out, the wasp had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The king, who never doubted the truth of this tale, bade his son go to rest at once and recover from the fatigues of the night. But he himself went and ordered many feasts to be held in honor of the preservation of the wonderful fruit. The whole capital was in a stir, and everyone shared in the king's joy. The prince alone took no part in the festivities. While the king was at a banquet, Iwanich took some purses of gold, and mounting the quickest horse in the royal stable, he sped off like the wind without a single soul being any the wiser. It was only on the next day that they missed him. The king was very distressed at his disappearance and sent search parties all over the kingdom to look for him, but in vain. And after 6 months, they gave him up as dead, and in another 6 months, they had forgotten all about him. But in the meantime, the prince, with the help of his ring, had had a most successful journey, and no evil had befallen him. At the end of 3 months, he came to the entrance of a huge forest, which looked as if it had never been trodden by human foot before, and which seemed to stretch out indefinitely. The prince was about to enter the wood by a little path he had discovered, when he heard a voice shouting to him, "Hold, youth. Whither are you going?" Iwanich turned round and saw a tall, gaunt-looking man, clad in miserable rags, leaning on a crooked staff and seated at the foot of an oak tree, which was so much the same color as himself that it was little wonder the prince had ridden past the tree without noticing him. "Where else should I be going?" he said. "Then through the wood?" "Through the wood?" said the old man in amazement. "It's easily seen that you have heard nothing of this forest, that you rush so blindly to meet your doom. Well, listen to me before you ride any further. Let me tell you that this wood hides in its depths a countless number of the fiercest tigers, hyenas, wolves, bears, and snakes, and all sorts of other monsters. If I were to cut you and your horse up into tiny morsels and throw them to the beasts, there wouldn't be one bit for each 100 of them. Take my advice, therefore, and if you wish to save your life, follow some other path." The prince was rather taken aback by the old man's words, and considered for a minute what he should do. Then, looking at his ring, and perceiving that it sparkled as brightly as ever, he called out, "If this wood held even more terrible things than it does, I cannot help myself, for I must go through it." Here he spurred his horse and rode on, but the old beggar screamed so loudly after him that the prince turned round and rode back to the oak tree. "I am really sorry for you," said the beggar, "but if you are quite determined to brave the dangers of the forest, let me at least give you a piece of advice which will help you against these monsters. Take this bag full of breadcrumbs and this live hare. I will make you a present of them both, as I am anxious to save your life. But you must leave your horse behind you, for it would stumble over the fallen trees or get entangled in the briars and thorns. When you have gone about 100 yards into the wood, the wild beasts will surround you. Then you must instantly seize your bag and scatter the breadcrumbs among them. They will rush to eat them up greedily, and when you have scattered the last crumb, you must lose no time in throwing the hare to them. As soon as the hare feels itself on the ground, it will run away as quickly as possible, and the wild beasts will turn to pursue it. In this way, you will be able to get through the wood unhurt." Iwanich thanked the old man for his counsel, dismounted from his horse, and, taking the bag and the hare in his arms, he entered the forest. He had hardly lost sight of his gaunt gray friend when he heard growls and snarls in the thicket close to him. And before he had time to think, he found himself surrounded by the most dreadful-looking creatures. On one side, he saw the glittering eye of a cruel tiger. On the other, the gleaming teeth of a great she-wolf. Here a huge bear growled fiercely, and there a horrible snake coiled itself in the grass at his feet. But Iwanich did not forget the old man's advice, and quickly put his hand into the bag and took out as many breadcrumbs as he could hold in his hand at a time. He threw them to the beasts, but soon the bag grew lighter and lighter, and the prince began to feel a little frightened. And now the last crumb was gone, and the hungry beasts thronged round him, greedy for fresh prey. Then he seized the hare and threw it to them. No sooner did the little creature feel itself on the ground than it lay back its ears and flew through the wood like an arrow from a bow, closely pursued by the wild beasts, and the prince was left alone. He looked at his ring, and when he saw that it sparkled as brightly as ever, he went straight on through the forest. He hadn't gone very far when he saw a most extraordinary-looking man coming towards him. He was not more than 3 feet high. His legs were quite crooked, and all his body was covered with prickles like a hedgehog. 2 lions walked with him, fastened to his side by the 2 ends of his long beard. He stopped the prince and asked him in a harsh voice, "Are you the man who has just fed my bodyguard?" Iwanich was so startled that he could hardly reply, but the little man continued, "I am most grateful to you for your kindness. What can I give you as a reward?" "All I ask," replied Iwanich, "is that I should be allowed to go through this wood in safety." "Most certainly," answered the little man, "and for greater security I will give you one of my lions as a protector. But when you leave this wood and come near a palace which does not belong to my domain, let the lion go, in order that he may not fall into the hands of an enemy and be killed." With these words, he loosened the lion from his beard and bade the beast guard the youth carefully. With this new protector, Iwanich wandered on through the forest, and though he came upon a great many more wolves, hyenas, leopards, and other wild beasts, they always kept at a respectful distance when they saw what sort of an escort the prince had with him. Iwanich hurried through the wood as quickly as his legs would carry him, but nevertheless, hour after hour went by, and not a trace of a green field or a human habitation met his eyes. At length, towards evening, the mass of trees grew more transparent, and through the interlaced branches, a wide plain was visible. At the exit of the wood, the lion stood still, and the prince took leave of him, having first thanked him warmly for his kind protection. It had become quite dark, and Iwanich was forced to wait for daylight before continuing his journey. He made himself a bed of grass and leaves, lit a fire of dry branches and slept soundly till the next morning. Then he got up and walked towards a beautiful white palace which he saw gleaming in the distance. In about an hour, he reached the building, and opening the door, he walked in. After wandering through many marble halls, he came to a huge staircase made of porphyry, leading down to a lovely garden. The prince burst into a shout of joy when he suddenly perceived Militsa in the center of a group of girls who were weaving wreaths of flowers with which to deck their mistress. As soon as Militsa saw the prince, she ran up to him and embraced him tenderly. And after he had told her all his adventures, they went into the palace, where a sumptuous meal awaited them. Then the princess called her court together and introduced Iwanich to them as her future husband. Preparations were at once made for the wedding, which was held soon after with great pomp and magnificence. 3 months of great happiness followed, when Militsa received one day an invitation to visit her mother's sister. Although the princess was very unhappy at leaving her husband, she did not like to refuse the invitation, and, promising to return in 7 days at the latest, she took a tender farewell of the prince and said, "Before I go, I will hand you over all the keys of the castle. Go everywhere and do anything you like. Only one thing I beg and beseech you. Do not open the little iron door in the north tower, which is closed with 7 locks and 7 bolts, for if you do, we shall both suffer for it." Iwanich promised what she asked, and Militsa departed, repeating her promise to return in 7 days. When the prince found himself alone, he began to be tormented by pangs of curiosity as to what the room in the tower contained. For 2 days he resisted the temptation to go and look, but on the 3rd he could stand it no longer, and taking a torch in his hand, he hurried to the tower and unfastened one lock after the other of the little iron door until it burst open. What an unexpected sight met his gaze. The prince perceived a small room, black with smoke, lit up feebly by a fire from which issued long blue flames. Over the fire hung a huge cauldron full of boiling pitch, and fastened into the cauldron by iron chains stood a wretched man screaming with agony. Iwanich was much horrified at the sight before him, and asked the man what terrible crime he had committed to be punished in this dreadful fashion. "I will tell you everything," said the man in the cauldron. "But first, relieve my torments a little, I implore you." "And how can I do that?" asked the prince. "With a little water," replied the man. "Only sprinkle a few drops over me, and I shall feel better." The prince, moved by pity, without thinking what he was doing, ran to the courtyard of the castle and filled a jug with water, which he poured over the man in the cauldron. In a moment, a most fearful crash was heard, as if all the pillars of the palace were giving way, and the palace itself, with towers and doors, windows and the cauldron, whirled round the bewildered prince's head. This continued for a few minutes, and then everything vanished into thin air, and Iwanich found himself suddenly alone upon a desolate heath covered with rocks and stones. The prince, who now realized what his heedlessness had done, cursed too late his spirit of curiosity. In his despair, he wandered on over the heath, never looking where he put his feet, and full of sorrowful thoughts. At last, he saw a light in the distance, which came from a miserable-looking little hut. The owner of it was none other than the kind-hearted, gaunt, gray beggar who had given the prince the bag of breadcrumbs and the hare. Without recognizing Iwanich, he opened the door when he knocked and gave him shelter for the night. On the following morning, the prince asked his host if he could get him any work to do, as he was quite unknown in the neighborhood and had not enough money to take him home. "My son," replied the old man, "all this country round here is uninhabited. I myself have to wander to distant villages for my living, and even then, I do not very often find enough to satisfy my hunger. But if you would like to take service with the old witch Corva, go straight up the little stream which flows below my hut for about 3 hours, and you will come to a sand hill on the left-hand side. That is where she lives." Iwanich thanked the gaunt gray beggar for his information and went on his way. After walking for about 3 hours, the prince came upon a dreary-looking gray stone wall. This was the back of the building and did not attract him. But when he came upon the front of the house, he found it even less inviting, for the old witch had surrounded her dwelling with a fence of spikes, on every one of which a man's skull was stuck. In this horrible enclosure stood a small black house, which had only 2 grated windows, all covered with cobwebs, and a battered iron door. The prince knocked, and a rasping woman's voice told him to enter. Iwanich opened the door and found himself in a smoke-begrimed kitchen, in the presence of a hideous old woman who was warming her skinny hands at a fire. The prince offered to become her servant, and the old hag told him she was badly in want of one, and he seemed to be just the person to suit her. When Iwanich asked what his work and how much his wages would be, the witch bade him follow her, and led the way through a narrow, damp passage into a vault, which served as a stable. Here he perceived 2 pitch-black horses in a stall. "You see before you," said the old woman, "a mare and her foal. You have nothing to do but to lead them out to the fields every day, and to see that neither of them runs away from you. If you look after them both for a whole year, I will give you anything you like to ask. But if, on the other hand, you let either of the animals escape you, your last hour is come, and your head shall be stuck on the last spike of my fence. The other spikes, as you see, are already adorned, and the skulls are all those of different servants I have had, who have failed to do what I demanded. Iwanich, who thought he could not be much worse off than he was already, agreed to the witch's proposal. At daybreak next morning, he drove his horses to the field and brought them back in the evening without their ever having attempted to break away from him. The witch stood at her door and received him kindly and set a good meal before him. So it continued for some time, and all went well with the prince. Early every morning, he led the horses out to the fields and brought them home safe and sound in the evening. One day, while he was watching the horses, he came to the banks of a river and saw a big fish, which through some mischance had been cast on the land, struggling hard to get back into the water. Iwanich, who felt sorry for the poor creature, seized it in his arms and flung it into the stream. But no sooner did the fish find itself in the water again than, to the prince's amazement, it swam up to the bank and said, "My kind benefactor, how can I reward you for your goodness?" "I desire nothing," answered the prince. "I am quite content to have been able to be of some service to you." "You must do me the favor," replied the fish, "to take a scale from my body and keep it carefully. If you should ever need my help, throw it into the river, and I will come to your aid at once." Iwanich bowed, loosened a scale from the body of the grateful beast, put it carefully away, and returned home. A short time after this, when he was going early one morning to the usual grazing place with his horses, he noticed a flock of birds assembled together, making a great noise and flying wildly backwards and forwards. Full of curiosity, Iwanich hurried up to the spot and saw that a large number of ravens had attacked an eagle, and although the eagle was baistu and powerful and was making a brave fight, it was overpowered at last by numbers and had to give in. But the prince, who was sorry for the poor bird, seized the branch of a tree and hit out at the ravens with it. Terrified at this unexpected onslaught, they flew away, leaving many of their number dead or wounded on the battlefield. As soon as the eagle saw itself free from its tormentors, it plucked a feather from its wing, and handing it to the prince, said, "Here, my kind benefactor, take this feather as a proof of my gratitude. Should you ever be in need of my help, blow this feather into the air, and I will help you as much as is in my power." Iwanich thanked the bird, and placing the feather beside the scale, he drove the horses home. Another day, he had wandered farther than usual and came close to a farmyard. The place pleased the prince, and as there was plenty of good grass for the horses, he determined to spend the day there. Just as he was sitting down under a tree, he heard a cry close to him and saw a fox which had been caught in a trap placed there by the farmer. In vain did the poor beast try to free itself. Then the good-natured prince came once more to the rescue and let the fox out of the trap. The fox thanked him heartily, tore 2 hairs out of his bushy tail, and said, "Should you ever stand in need of my help, throw these 2 hairs into the fire, and in a moment I shall be at your side, ready to obey you." Iwanich put the fox's hairs with the scale and the feather, and as it was getting dark, he hastened home with his horses. In the meantime, his service was drawing near to an end, and in 3 more days the year was up, and he would be able to get his reward and leave the witch. On the first evening of these last 3 days, when he came home and was eating his supper, he noticed the old woman stealing into the stables. The prince followed her secretly to see what she was going to do. He crouched down in the doorway and heard the wicked witch telling the horses to wait next morning till Iwanich was asleep, and then to go and hide themselves in the river, and to stay there till she told them to return. And if they didn't do as she told them, the old woman threatened to beat them till they bled. When Iwanich heard all this, he went back to his room, determined that nothing should induce him to fall asleep next day. On the following morning, he led the mare and foal to the fields as usual, but bound a cord round them both, which he kept in his hand. But after a few hours, by the magic arts of the old witch, he was overpowered by sleep, and the mare and foal escaped and did as they had been told to do. The prince did not awake till late in the evening, and when he did, he found, to his horror, that the horses had disappeared. Filled with despair, he cursed the moment when he had entered the service of the cruel witch, and already he saw his head sticking up on the sharp spike beside the others. Then he suddenly remembered the fish's scale, which, with the eagle's feather and the fox's hairs, he always carried about with him. He drew the scale from his pocket, and hurrying to the river, he threw it in. In a minute, the grateful fish swam towards the bank on which Iwanich was standing, and said, "What do you command, my friend and benefactor?" The prince replied, "I had to look after a mare and foal, and they have run away from me and have hidden themselves in the river. If you wish to save my life, drive them back to the land. "Wait a moment," answered the fish, "and I and my friends will soon drive them out of the water." With these words, the creature disappeared into the depths of the stream. Almost immediately, a rushing, hissing sound was heard in the waters. The waves dashed against the banks. The foam was tossed into the air, and the two horses leapt suddenly onto the dry land, trembling and shaking with fear. Iwanich sprang at once onto the mare's back, seized the foal by its bridle, and hastened home in the highest spirits. When the witch saw the prince bringing the horses home, she could hardly conceal her wrath. And as soon as she had placed Iwanich's supper before him, she stole away again to the stables. The prince followed her and heard her scolding the beasts harshly for not having hidden themselves better. She bade them wait next morning till Iwanich was asleep, and then to hide themselves in the clouds, and to remain there till she called. If they did not do as she told them, she would beat them till they bled. The next morning, after Iwanich had led his horses to the fields, he fell once more into a magic sleep. The horses at once ran away and hid themselves in the clouds, which hung down from the mountains in soft, billowy masses. When the prince awoke and found that both the mare and the foal had disappeared, he bethought him at once of the eagle, and taking the feather out of his pocket, he blew it into the air. In a moment, the bird swooped down beside him and asked, "What do you wish me to do?" "My mare and foal," replied the prince, "have run away from me and have hidden themselves in the clouds. If you wish to save my life, restore both animals to me." "Wait a minute," answered the eagle. "With the help of my friends, I will soon drive them back to you." With these words, the bird flew up into the air and disappeared among the clouds. Almost directly, Iwanich saw his two horses being driven towards him by a host of eagles of all sizes. He caught the mare and foal, and having thanked the eagle, he drove them cheerfully home again. The old witch was more disgusted than ever when she saw him appearing, and having set his supper before him, she stole into the stables, and Iwanich heard her abusing the horses for not having hidden themselves better in the clouds. Then she bade them hide themselves next morning, as soon as Iwanich was asleep, in the king's hen house, which stood on a lonely part of the heath, and to remain there till she called. If they failed to do as she told them, she would certainly beat them, this time till they bled. On the following morning, the prince drove his horses, as usual, to the fields. After he had been overpowered by sleep, as on the former days, the mare and foal ran away and hid themselves in the royal hen house. When the prince awoke and found the horses gone, he determined to appeal to the fox. So, lighting a fire, he threw the 2 hares into it. And in a few moments, the fox stood beside him and asked, "In what way can I serve you?" "I wish to know," replied Iwanich, "where the king's henhouse is." "Hardly an hour's walk from here," answered the fox, and offered to show the prince the way to it. While they were walking along, the fox asked him what he wanted to do at the royal henhouse. The prince told him of the misfortune that had befallen him, and of the necessity of recovering the mare and foal. "That is no easy matter," replied the fox. "But wait a moment. I have an idea. Stand at the door of the henhouse and wait there for your horses. In the meantime, I will slip in among the hens through a hole in the wall and give them a good chase, so that the noise they make will arouse the royal henwives, and they will come to see what is the matter. When they see the horses, they will at once imagine them to be the cause of the disturbance, and will drive them out. Then you must lay hands on the mare and foal and catch them." All turned out exactly as the sly fox had foreseen. The prince swung himself on the mare, seized the foal by its bridle, and hurried home. While he was riding over the heath in the highest of spirits, the mare suddenly said to her rider, "You are the first person who has ever succeeded in outwitting the old witch Corva. And now you may ask what reward you like for your service. If you promise never to betray me, I will give you a piece of advice which you will do well to follow." The prince promised never to betray her confidence, and the mare continued, "Ask nothing else as a reward than my foal, for it has not its like in the world, and is not to be bought for love or money. For it can go from one end of the earth to another in a few minutes. Of course, the cunning Corva will do her best to dissuade you from taking the foal, and will tell you that it is both idle and sickly. But do not believe her, and stick to your point." Iwanich longed to possess such an animal, and promised the mare to follow her advice. This time, Corva received him in the most friendly manner, and set a sumptuous repast before him. As soon as he had finished, she asked him what reward he demanded for his year's service. "Nothing more nor less," replied the prince, "than the foal of your mare." The witch pretended to be much astonished at his request, and said that he deserved something much better than the foal, for the beast was lazy and nervous, blind in one eye, and, in short, was quite worthless. But the prince knew what he wanted, and when the old witch saw that he had made up his mind to have the foal, she said, "I am obliged to keep my promise and to hand you over the foal. And as I know who you are and what you want, I will tell you in what way the animal will be useful to you." The man in the cauldron of boiling pitch, whom you set free, is a mighty magician. Through your curiosity and thoughtlessness, Militza came into his power, and he has transported her and her castle and belongings into a distant country. You are the only person who can kill him, and in consequence, he fears you to such an extent that he has set spies to watch you, and they report your movements to him daily. When you have reached him, beware of speaking a single word to him, or you will fall into the power of his friends. Seize him at once by the beard and dash him to the ground." Iwanich thanked the old witch, mounted his foal, put spurs to its sides, and they flew like lightning through the air. Already it was growing dark when Iwanich perceived some figures in the distance. They soon came up to them, and then the prince saw that it was the magician and his friends who were driving through the air in a carriage drawn by owls. When the magician found himself face to face with Iwanich, without hope of escape, he turned to him with false friendliness and said, "Thrice my kind benefactor." But the prince, without saying a word, seized him at once by his beard and dashed him to the ground. At the same moment, the foal sprang on the top of the magician and kicked and stamped on him with his hoofs till he died. Then Iwanich found himself once more in the palace of his bride, and Militza herself flew into his arms. From this time forward, they lived in undisturbed peace and happiness till the end of their lives. The Magic Ring. Once upon a time, there lived an old couple who had one son called Martin. Now, when the old man's time had come, he stretched himself out on his bed and died. Though all his life long he had toiled and moiled, he only left his widow and son 200 florins. The old woman determined to put by the money for a rainy day, but alas, the rainy day was close at hand, for their meal was all consumed. And who is prepared to face starvation with 200 florins at their disposal? So the old woman counted out 100 of her florins, and giving them to Martin, told him to go into the town and lay in a store of meal for a year. So Martin started off for the town. When he reached the meat market, he found the whole place in turmoil, and a great noise of angry voices and barking of dogs. Mixing in the crowd, he noticed a staghound, which the butchers had caught and tied to a post, and which was being flogged in a merciless manner. Overcome with pity, Martin spoke to the butchers, saying, "Friends, why are you beating the poor dog so cruelly?" "We have every right to beat him," they replied. "He has just devoured a newly killed pig." "Leave off beating him," said Martin, "and sell him to me instead. If you choose to buy him answered the butchers derisively. "But for such a treasure we won't take a penny less than 100 florins." 100! exclaimed Martin. "Well, so be it, if you will not take less." And taking the money out of his pocket, he handed it over in exchange for the dog, whose name was Shurka. When Martin got home, his mother met him with the question, "Well, what have you bought?" "Shurka, the dog," replied Martin, pointing to his new possession. Whereupon his mother became very angry and abused him roundly. He ought to be ashamed of himself when there was scarcely a handful of meal in the house, to have spent the money on a useless brute like that. On the following day, she sent him back to the town, saying, "Here, take our last 100 florins, and buy provisions with them. I have just emptied the last grains of meal out of the chest and baked a bannock, but it won't last over tomorrow." Just as Martin was entering the town, he met a rough-looking peasant who was dragging a cat after him by a string which was fastened round the poor beast's neck. "Stop!" cried Martin. "Where are you dragging that poor cat?" "I mean to drown him," was the answer. "What harm has the poor beast done?" said Martin. "It has just killed a goose," replied the peasant. "Don't drown him. Sell him to me instead," begged Martin. "Not for 100 florins," was the answer. "Surely for 100 florins you'll sell it," said Martin. "See, here is the money." And so saying, he handed him the 100 florins, which the peasant pocketed, and Martin took possession of the cat, which was called Waska. When he reached his home, his mother greeted him with the question, "Well, what have you brought back?" "I have brought this cat, Waska," answered Martin. "And what besides?" "I had no money over to buy anything else with," replied Martin. "You useless ne'er-do-weel," exclaimed his mother in a great passion. "Leave the house at once and go and beg your bread among strangers." And as Martin did not dare to contradict her, he called Shurka and Waska and started off with them to the nearest village in search of work. On the way, he met a rich peasant who asked him where he was going. "I want to get work as a day laborer," he answered. "Come along with me then. But I must tell you, I engage my laborers without wages. If you serve me faithfully for a year, I promise you it shall be for your advantage." So Martin consented, and for a year he worked diligently and served his master faithfully, not sparing himself in any way. When the day of reckoning had come, the peasant led him into a barn, and pointing to 2 full sacks, said, "Take whichever of these you choose." Martin examined the contents of the sacks, and seeing that one was full of silver and the other of sand, he said to himself, There must be some trick about this. I had better take the sand. And throwing the sack over his shoulders, he started out into the world in search of fresh work. And on he walked, and at last he reached a great gloomy wood. In the middle of the wood, he came upon a meadow where a fire was burning. And in the midst of the fire, surrounded by flames, was a lovely damsel, more beautiful than anything that Martin had ever seen. And when she saw him, she called to him, "Martin, if you would win happiness, save my life. Extinguish the flames with the sand that you earned in payment of your faithful service." Truly, thought Martin to himself, it would be more sensible to save a fellow being's life with this sand than to drag it about on one's back, seeing what a weight it is. And forthwith he lowered the sack from his shoulders and emptied its contents on the flames. And instantly the fire was extinguished. But at the same moment, lo! And behold, the lovely damsel turned into a serpent, and darting upon him, coiled itself round his neck, and whispered lovingly in his ear, "Do not be afraid of me, Martin. I love you, and will go with you through the world. But first, you must follow me boldly into my Father's kingdom, underneath the earth. And when we get there, remember this: he will offer you gold and silver and dazzling gems. But do not touch them. Ask him, instead, for the ring which he wears on his little finger. For in that ring lies a magic power. You have only to throw it from one hand to the other, and at once 12 young men will appear, who will do your bidding, no matter how difficult, in a single night." So they started on their way, and after much wandering, they reached a spot where a great rock rose straight up in the middle of the road. Instantly, the serpent uncoiled itself from his neck, and as it touched the damp earth, it resumed the shape of the lovely damsel. Pointing to the rock, she showed him an opening just big enough for a man to wriggle through. Passing into it, they entered a long underground passage, which led out onto a wide field, above which spread a blue sky. In the middle of the field stood a magnificent castle built out of porphyry, with a roof of gold and with glittering battlements. And his beautiful guide told him that this was the palace in which her father lived and reigned over his kingdom in the underworld. Together, they entered the palace and were received by the king with great kindness. Turning to his daughter, he said, "My child, I had almost given up the hope of ever seeing you again. Where have you been all these years?" "My father," she replied, "I owe my life to this youth, who saved me from a terrible death." Upon which The king turned to Martin with a gracious smile, saying, "I will reward your courage by granting you whatever your heart desires. Take as much gold, silver, and precious stones as you choose." "I thank you, mighty king, for your gracious offer," answered Martin. "But I do not covet either gold, silver, or precious stones. Yet if you will grant me a favor, give me, I beg, the ring from off the little finger of your royal hand. Every time my eye falls on it, I shall think of your gracious majesty. And when I marry, I shall present it to my bride." So the king took the ring from his finger and gave it to Martin, saying, "Take it, good youth. But with it I make one condition. You are never to confide to anyone that this is a magic ring. If you do, you will straightway bring misfortune on yourself." Martin took the ring, and having thanked the king, he set out on the same road by which he had come down into the underworld. When he had regained the upper air, he started for his old home, and having found his mother still living in the old house where he had left her, they settled down together very happily. So uneventful was their life that it almost seemed as if it would go on in this way always, without let or hindrance. But one day it suddenly came into his mind that he would like to get married, and moreover, that he would choose a very grand wife, a king's daughter, in short. But as he did not trust himself as a wooer, he determined to send his old mother on the mission. "You must go to the king," he said to her, "and demand the hand of his lovely daughter in marriage for me." "What are you thinking of, my son?" answered the old woman, aghast at the idea. "Why cannot you marry someone in your own rank? That would be far more fitting than to send a poor old woman like me a-wooing to the king's court for the hand of a princess. Why, it is as much as our heads are worth. Neither my life nor yours would be worth anything if I went on such a fool's errand." "Never fear, little mother," answered Martin. "Trust me, all will be well. But see that you do not come back without an answer of some kind." And so, obedient to her son's behest, the old woman hobbled off to the palace and, without being hindered, reached the courtyard and began to mount the flight of steps leading to the royal presence chamber. At the head of the landing, rows of courtiers were collected in magnificent attire, who stared at the queer old figure and called to her and explained to her with every kind of sign that it was strictly forbidden to mount those steps. But their stern words and forbidding gestures made no impression whatever on the old woman, and she resolutely continued to climb the stairs, bent on carrying out her son's orders. Upon this, some of the courtiers seized her by the arms and held her back by sheer force, at which she set up such a yell that the king himself heard it, and stepped out onto the balcony to see what was the matter. When he beheld the old woman flinging her arms wildly about, and heard her scream that she would not leave the place till she had laid her case before the king, he ordered that she should be brought into his presence, and forthwith she was conducted into the golden presence chamber, where, leaning back amongst cushions of royal purple, the king sat, surrounded by his counselors and courtiers. Courtesying low, the old woman stood silent before him. "Well, my good old dame, what can I do for you?" asked the king. "I have come," replied Martin's mother, "and your majesty must not be angry with me. I have come a-wooing." "Is the woman out of her mind?" said the king, with an angry frown. But Martin's mother answered boldly, "If the king will only listen patiently to me and give me a straightforward answer, he will see that I am not out of my mind. You, O king, have a lovely daughter to give in marriage. I have a son, a wooer, as clever a youth and as good a son-in-law as you will find in your whole kingdom. There is nothing that he cannot do. Now tell me, O king, plump and plain, will you give your daughter to my son as wife?" The king listened to the end of the old woman's strange request, but every moment his face grew blacker and his features sterner, till all at once he thought to himself, "Is it worthwhile that I, the king, should be angry with this poor old fool?" And all the courtiers and counselors were amazed when they saw the hard lines round his mouth and the frown on his brow grow smooth, and heard the mild but mocking tones in which he answered the old woman, saying, "If your son is as wonderfully clever as you say, and if there is nothing in the world that he cannot do, let him build a magnificent castle just opposite my palace windows in 24 hours. The palace must be joined together by a bridge of pure crystal. On each side of the bridge, there must be growing trees having golden and silver apples, and with birds of paradise among the branches. At the right of the bridge, there must be a church with 5 golden cupolas. In this church, your son shall be wedded to my daughter, and we will keep the wedding festivities in the new castle. But if he fails to execute this my royal command, then, as a just but mild monarch, I shall give orders that you and he are taken, and first dipped in tar, and then in feathers, and you shall be executed in the marketplace for the entertainment of my courtiers." And a smile played round the king's lips as he finished speaking, and his courtiers and counselors shook with laughter when they thought of the old woman's folly, and praised the king's wise device, and said to each other, What a joke it will be when we see the pair of them tarred and feathered. The son is just as able to grow a beard on the palm of his hand as to execute such a task in 24 hours. Now the poor old woman was mortally afraid, and in a trembling voice she asked, "Is that really your royal will, O king? Must I take this order to my poor son?" "Yes, old dame, such is my command. If your son carries out my order, he shall be rewarded with my daughter. But if he fails, away to the tar barrel and the stake with you both." On her way home, the poor old woman shed bitter tears, and when she saw Martin, she told him what the king had said, and sobbed out, "Didn't I tell you, my son, that you should marry someone of your own rank? It would have been better for us this day if you had. As I told you, my going to court has been as much as our lives are worth, and now we will both be tarred and feathered and burnt in the public marketplace. It is terrible." And she moaned and cried. "Never fear, little mother," answered Martin. "Trust me, and you will see all will be well. You may go to sleep with a quiet mind." And, stepping to the front of the hut, Martin threw his ring from the palm of one hand into the other, upon which 12 youths instantly appeared, and demanded what he wanted them to do. Then he told them the king's commands, and they answered that by next morning all should be accomplished exactly as the king had ordered. Next morning, when the king awoke and looked out of his window, to his amazement, he beheld a magnificent castle just opposite his own palace, and joined to it a bridge of pure crystal. At each side of the bridge, trees were growing, from whose branches hung golden and silver apples, among which birds of paradise perched. At the right, gleaming in the sun, were the 5 golden cupolas of a splendid church, whose bells rang out, as if they would summon people from all corners of the earth to come and behold the wonder. Now, though the king would much rather have seen his future son-in-law tarred, feathered, and burnt at the stake, he remembered his royal oath, and had to make the best of a bad business. So he took heart of grace, and made Martin a duke, and gave his daughter a rich dowry, and prepared the grandest wedding feast that had ever been seen, so that to this day the old people in the country still talk of it. After the wedding, Martin and his royal bride went to dwell in the magnificent new palace, and here Martin lived in the greatest comfort and luxury, such luxury as he had never imagined. But though he was as happy as the day was long, and as merry as a grig, the king's daughter fretted all day, thinking of the indignity that had been done her in making her marry Martin, the poor widow's son, instead of a rich young prince from a foreign country. So unhappy was she that she spent all her time wondering how she should get rid of her undesirable husband. And first, she determined to learn the secret of his power. And with flattering, caressing words, she tried to coax him to tell her how he was so clever that there was nothing in the world that he could not do. At first, he would tell her nothing. But once, when he was in a yielding mood, she approached him with a winning smile on her lovely face, and speaking flattering words to him, she gave him a potion to drink, with a sweet, strong taste. And when he had drunk it, Martin's lips were unsealed, and he told her that all his power lay in the magic ring that he wore on his finger, and he described to her how to use it. And still speaking, he fell into a deep sleep. And when she saw that the potion had worked and that he was sound asleep, the princess took the magic ring from his finger, and going into the courtyard, she threw it from the palm of one hand into the other. On the instant, the 12 youths appeared and asked her what she commanded them to do. Then she told them that by the next morning they were to do away with the castle and the bridge and the church, and put in their stead the humble hut in which Martin used to live with his mother, and that while he slept, her husband was to be carried to his old, lowly room, and that they were to bear her away to the utmost ends of the earth, where an old king lived, who would make her welcome in his palace, and surround her with the state that befitted a royal princess. "You shall be obeyed," answered the 12 youths at the same moment. And lo and behold, the following morning, when the king awoke and looked out of his window, he beheld to his amazement that the palace, bridge, church, and trees had all vanished, and there was nothing in their place but a bare, miserable-looking hut. Immediately the king sent for his son-in-law and commanded him to explain what had happened. But Martin looked at his royal father-in-law and answered never a word. Then the king was very angry, and calling a council together, he charged Martin with having been guilty of witchcraft and of having deceived the king and having made away with the princess. And he was condemned to imprisonment in a high stone tower, with neither meat nor drink, till he should die of starvation. Then, in the hour of his dire necessity, his old friends Shurka, the dog, and Waska, the cat, remembered how Martin had once saved them from a cruel death, and they took counsel together as to how they should help him. And Shurka growled, and was of opinion that he would like to tear everyone in pieces. But Waska purred meditatively and scratched the back of her ear with a velvet paw, and remained lost in thought. At the end of a few minutes, she had made up her mind, and turning to Shurka, said, "Let us go together into the town, and the moment we meet a baker, you must make a rush between his legs and upset the tray from off his head. I will lay hold of the rolls and will carry them off to our master." No sooner said than done. Together, the two faithful creatures trotted off into the town, and very soon they met a baker bearing a tray on his head and looking round on all sides while he cried, "Fresh rolls, sweet cake, fancy bread of every kind. Come and buy, come and take, sure you'll find it to your mind." At that moment, Shurka made a rush between his legs. The baker stumbled, the tray was upset, the rolls fell to the ground, and while the man angrily pursued Shurka, Waska managed to drag the rolls out of sight behind a bush. And when a moment later Shurka joined her, they set off at full tilt to the stone tower where Martin was a prisoner, taking the rolls with them. Waska, being very agile, climbed up by the outside to the grated window and called in an anxious voice, "Are you alive, master?" "Scarcely alive, almost starved to death," answered Martin in a weak voice. "I little thought it would come to this, that I should die of hunger." "Never fear, dear master. Shurka and I will look after you," said Waska, and in another moment she had climbed down and brought him back a roll, and then another, and another, till she had brought him the whole tray load. Upon which she said, "Dear master, Shurka and I are going off to a distant kingdom at the utmost ends of the earth to fetch you back your magic ring. You must be careful that the rolls last till our return." And Waska took leave of her beloved master and set off with Shurka on their journey. On and on they traveled, looking always to right and left for traces of the princess, following up every track, making inquiries of every cat and dog they met, listening to the talk of every wayfarer they passed. And at last they heard that the kingdom at the utmost ends of the earth, where the 12 youths had borne the princess, was not very far off. And at last, one day, they reached that distant kingdom, and going at once to the palace, they began to make friends with all the dogs and cats in the place, and to question them about the princess and the magic ring. But no one could tell them much about either. Now, one day, it chanced that Waska had gone down to the palace cellar to hunt for mice and rats, and seeing an especially fat, well-fed mouse, she pounced upon it, buried her claws in its soft fur, and was just going to gobble it up when she was stopped by the pleading tones of the little creature, saying, "If you will only spare my life, I may be of great service to you. I will do everything in my power for you. For I am the king of the mice, and if I perish, the whole race will die out." "So be it," said Waska. "I will spare your life, but in return, you must do something for me. In this castle, there lives a princess, the wicked wife of my dear master. She has stolen away his magic ring. You must get it away from her at whatever cost. Do you hear? Till you have done this, I won't take my claws out of your fur." "Good," replied the mouse. "I will do what you ask." And so saying, he summoned all the mice in his kingdom together. A countless number of mice, small and big, brown and gray, assembled and formed a circle round their king, who was a prisoner under Waska's claws. Turning to them, he said, "Dear and faithful subjects, whoever among you will steal the magic ring from the strange princess will release me from a cruel death, and I shall honor him above all the other mice in the kingdom." Instantly, a tiny mouse stepped forward and said, "I often creep about the princess's bedroom at night, and I have noticed that she has a ring which she treasures as the apple of her eye. All day she wears it on her finger, and at night she keeps it in her mouth. I will undertake, sire, to steal away the ring for you." And the tiny mouse tripped away into the bedroom of the princess and waited for nightfall. Then, when the princess had fallen asleep, it crept up onto her bed and gnawed a hole in the pillow, through which it dragged one by one little down feathers, and threw them under the princess's nose. And the fluff flew into the princess's nose and into her mouth, and starting up, she sneezed and coughed, and the ring fell out of her mouth onto the coverlet. In a flash, the tiny mouse had seized it and brought it to Waska as a ransom for the king of the mice. Thereupon Waska and Shurka started off and traveled night and day till they reached the stone tower where Martin was imprisoned. And the cat climbed up the window and called out to him, "Martin, dear master, are you still alive?" "Ah, Waska, my faithful little cat, is that you?" replied a weak voice. "I am dying of hunger. For 3 days I have not tasted food." "Be of good heart, dear master," replied Waska. "From this day forth you will know nothing but happiness and prosperity. If this were a moment to trouble you with riddles, I would make you guess what Shurka and I have brought you back. Only think, we have got you your ring." At these words, Martin's joy knew no bounds, and he stroked her fondly. And she rubbed up against him and purred happily, while below, Shurka bounded in the air and barked joyfully. Then Martin took the ring and threw it from one hand into the other, and instantly the 12 youths appeared and asked what they were to do. "Fetch me first something to eat and drink, as quickly as possible, and after that bring musicians hither, and let us have music all day long." Now, When the people in the town and palace heard music coming from the tower, they were filled with amazement, and came to the king with the news that witchcraft must be going on in Martin's tower. For instead of dying of starvation, he was seemingly making merry to the sound of music and to the clatter of plates and glass and knives and forks. And the music was so enchantingly sweet that all the passers-by stood still to listen to it. On this, the king sent at once a messenger to the starvation tower, and he was so astonished with what he saw that he remained rooted to the spot. Then the king sent his chief counselors, and they too were transfixed with wonder. At last the king came himself, and he likewise was spellbound by the beauty of the music. Then Martin summoned the 12 youths, spoke to them, saying, "Build up my castle again, and join it to the king's palace with a crystal bridge. Do not forget the trees with the golden and silver apples, and with the birds of paradise in the branches. And put back the church with the 5 cupolas, and let the bells ring out, summoning the people from the 4 corners of the kingdom. And one thing more, bring back my faithless wife, and lead her into the women's chamber." And it was all done as he commanded. And leaving the starvation tower, he took the king, his father-in-law, by the arm, and led him into the new palace, where the princess sat in fear and trembling, awaiting her death. And Martin spoke to the king, saying, "King and royal father, I have suffered much at the hands of your daughter. What punishment shall be dealt to her?" Then the mild king answered, "Beloved prince and son-in-law, if you love me, let your anger be turned to grace. Forgive my daughter, and restore her to your heart and favor." And Martin's heart was softened, and he forgave his wife, and they lived happily together ever after. And his old mother came and lived with him, and he never parted with Shurka and Waska. And I need hardly tell you that he never again let the ring out of his possession. The Flower Queen's Daughter. A young prince was riding one day through a meadow that stretched for miles in front of him, when he came to a deep, open ditch. He was turning aside to avoid it, when he heard the sound of someone crying in the ditch. He dismounted from his horse and stepped along in the direction the sound came from. To his astonishment, he found an old woman who begged him to help her out of the ditch. The prince bent down and lifted her out of her living grave, asking her at the same time how she had managed to get there. "My son," answered the old woman, "I am a very poor woman, and soon after midnight I set out for the neighboring town in order to sell my eggs in the market on the following morning. But I lost my way in the dark and fell into this deep ditch, where I might have remained forever, but for your kindness." Then the prince said to her, "You can hardly walk. I will put you on my horse and lead you home." "Where do you live?" "Over there, at the edge of the forest, in the little hut you see in the distance," replied the old woman. The prince lifted her onto his horse, and soon they reached the hut, where the old woman got down, and turning to the prince said, "Just wait a moment, and I will give you something." And she disappeared into her hut, but returned very soon and said, "You are a mighty prince, but at the same time you have a kind heart, which deserves to be rewarded. Would you like to have the most beautiful woman in the world for your wife?" "Most certainly I would," replied the prince. So the old woman continued, "The most beautiful woman in the whole world is the daughter of the Queen of the Flowers, who has been captured by a dragon. If you wish to marry her, you must first set her free. And this I will help you to do. I will give you this little bell. If you ring it once, the King of the Eagles will appear. If you ring it twice, the King of the Foxes will come to you. And if you ring it 3 times, you will see the King of the Fishes by your side. These will help you if you are in any difficulty. Now, farewell, and heaven prosper your undertaking." She handed him the little bell, and there disappeared hut and all, as though the earth had swallowed her up. Then it dawned on the prince that he had been speaking to a good fairy. And putting the little bell carefully in his pocket, he rode home and told his father that he meant to set the daughter of the Flower Queen free, and intended setting out on the following day into the wide world in search of the maid. So the next morning, the prince mounted his fine horse and left his home. He had roamed round the world for a whole year, and his horse had died of exhaustion, while he himself had suffered much from want and misery. But still, he had come on no trace of her he was in search of. At last, one day, he came to a hut, in front of which sat a very old man. The prince asked him, "Do you not know where the dragon lives, who keeps the daughter of the Flower Queen prisoner?" "No, I do not," answered the old man. "But if you go straight along this road for a year, you will reach a hut where my father lives, and possibly he may be able to tell you." The prince thanked him for his information and continued his journey for a whole year along the same road, and at the end of it came to the little hut, where he found a very old man. He asked him the same question, and the old man answered, "No, I do not know where the dragon lives. But go straight along this road for another year, and you will come to a hut in which my father lives. I know he can tell you." And so the prince wandered on for another year, always on the same road, and at last reached the hut where he found the third old man. He put the same question to him as he had put to his son and grandson. But this time the old man answered, "The dragon lives up there on the mountain, and he has just begun his year of sleep. For 1 whole year he is always awake, and the next he sleeps. But if you wish to see the Flower Queen's daughter go up the second mountain, the dragon's old mother lives there, and she has a ball every night, to which the Flower Queen's daughter goes regularly." So the prince went up the second mountain, where he found a castle all made of gold with diamond windows. He opened the big gate leading into the courtyard, and was just going to walk in when 7 dragons rushed on him and asked him what he wanted. The prince replied, "I have heard so much of the beauty and kindness of the dragon's mother, and would like to enter her service." This flattering speech pleased the dragons, and the eldest of them said, "Well, you may come with me, and I will take you to the mother dragon." They entered the castle and walked through 12 splendid halls, all made of gold and diamonds. In the 12th room, they found the mother dragon seated on a diamond throne. She was the ugliest woman under the sun, and, added to it all, she had 3 heads. Her appearance was a great shock to the prince, and so was her voice, which was like the croaking of many ravens. She asked him, "Why have you come here?" The prince answered at once, "I have heard so much of your beauty and kindness that I would very much like to enter your service." "Very well," said the mother dragon, "but if you wish to enter my service, you must first lead my mare out to the meadow and look after her for 3 days. But if you don't bring her home safely every evening, we will eat you up." The prince undertook the task and led the mare out to the meadow, but no sooner had they reached the grass than she vanished. The prince sought for her in vain, and at last, in despair, sat down on a big stone and contemplated his sad fate. As he sat thus lost in thought, he noticed an eagle flying over his head. Then he suddenly bethought him of his little bell, and taking it out of his pocket, he rang it once. In a moment, he heard a rustling sound in the air beside him, and the king of the eagles sank at his feet. "I know what you want of me," the bird said. "You are looking for the mother dragon's mare who is galloping about among the clouds. I will summon all the eagles of the air together and order them to catch the mare and bring her to you." And with these words, the king of the eagles flew away. Towards evening, the prince heard a mighty rushing sound in the air, and when he looked up, he saw thousands of eagles driving the mare before them. They sank at his feet onto the ground and gave the mare over to him. Then the prince rode home to the old mother dragon, who was full of wonder when she saw him, and said, "You have succeeded today in looking after my mare, and as a reward, you shall come to my ball tonight." She gave him at the same time a cloak made of copper, and led him to a big room where several young he-dragons and she-dragons were dancing together. Here, too, was the Flower Queen's beautiful daughter. Her dress was woven out of the most lovely flowers in the world, and her complexion was like lilies and roses. As the prince was dancing with her, he managed to whisper in her ear, "I have come to set you free." Then the beautiful girl said to him, "If you succeed in bringing the mare back safely the third day, ask the mother dragon to give you a foal of the mare as a reward." The ball came to an end at midnight, and early next morning, the prince again led the mother dragon's mare out into the meadow. But again, she vanished before his eyes. Then he took out his little bell and rang it twice. In a moment, the king of the foxes stood before him and said, "I know already what you want, and will summon all the foxes of the world together to find the mare who has hidden herself in a hill." With these words, the king of the foxes disappeared, and in the evening, many thousand foxes brought the mare to the prince. Then he rode home to the mother dragon, from whom he received this time a cloak made of silver, and again she led him to the ballroom. The Flower Queen's daughter was delighted to see him safe and sound, and when they were dancing together, she whispered in his ear, "If you succeed again tomorrow, wait for me with the foal in the meadow. After the ball, we will fly away together." On the third day, the prince led the mare to the meadow again, but once more she vanished before his eyes. Then the prince took out his little bell and rang it 3 times. In a moment, the king of the fishes appeared and said to him, "I know quite well what you want me to do, and I will summon all the fishes of the sea together and tell them to bring you back the mare who is hiding herself in a river." Towards evening, the mare was returned to him, and when he led her home to the mother dragon, she said to him, "You are a brave youth, and I will make you my body servant. But what shall I give you as a reward to begin with?" The prince begged for a foal of the mare, which the mother dragon at once gave him, and over and above, a cloak made of gold, for she had fallen in love with him because he had praised her beauty. So in the evening, he appeared at the ball in his golden cloak. But before the entertainment was over, he slipped away and went straight to the stables, where he mounted his foal and rode out into the meadow to wait for the Flower Queen's daughter. Towards midnight, the beautiful girl appeared, and placing her in front of him on his horse, the prince and she flew like the wind till they reached the Flower Queen's dwelling. But the dragons had noticed their flight and woke their brother out of his year's sleep. He flew into a terrible rage when he heard what had happened and determined to lay siege to the Flower Queen's palace. But the queen caused a forest of flowers as high as the sky to grow up round her dwelling, through which no one could force a way. When the Flower Queen heard that her daughter wanted to marry the prince, she said to him, "I will give my consent to your marriage gladly, but my daughter can only stay with you in summer. In winter, when everything is dead and the ground covered with snow, she must come and live with me in my palace underground." The prince consented to this and led his beautiful bride home, where the wedding was held with great pomp and magnificence. The young couple lived happily together till winter came, when the Flower Queen's daughter departed and went home to her mother. In summer, she returned to her husband, and their life of joy and happiness began again, and lasted till the approach of winter, when the Flower Queen's daughter went back again to her mother. This coming and going continued all her life long, and in spite of it, they always lived happily together. The Flying Ship. Once upon a time, there lived an old couple who had 3 sons. The 2 elder were clever, but the third was a regular dunce. The clever sons were very fond of their mother, gave her good clothes, and always spoke pleasantly to her. But the youngest was always getting in her way, and she had no patience with him. Now, one day, it was announced in the village that the king had issued a decree offering his daughter, the princess, in marriage to whoever should build a ship that could fly. Immediately, the 2 elder brothers determined to try their luck and asked their parents' blessing. So the old mother smartened up their clothes and gave them a store of provisions for their journey, not forgetting to add a bottle of brandy. When they had gone, the poor simpleton began to tease his mother to smarten him up and let him start off. "What would become of a dolt like you?" she answered. "Why, you would be eaten up by wolves." But the foolish youth kept repeating, "I will go, I will go, I will go." Seeing that she could do nothing with him, the mother gave him a crust of bread and a bottle of water, and took no further heed of him. So the simpleton set off on his way. When he had gone a short distance, he met a little old mannequin. They greeted one another, and the mannequin asked him where he was going. "I am off to the king's court," he answered. "He has promised to give his daughter to whoever can make a flying ship." "And can you make such a ship?" "Not I." "Then why in the world are you going?" "Can't tell," replied the simpleton. "Well, if that is the case," said the mannequin, "sit down beside me. We can rest for a little and have something to eat. Give me what you have got in your satchel." Now, the poor simpleton was ashamed to show what was in it. However, he thought it best not to make a fuss, so he opened the satchel and could scarcely believe his own eyes, for instead of the hard crust, he saw 2 beautiful fresh rolls and some cold meat. He shared them with the mannequin, who licked his lips and said, "Now, go into that wood and stop in front of the first tree, bow 3 times, and then strike the tree with your axe. Fall on your knees on the ground, with your face on the earth, and remain there till you are raised up. You will then find a ship at your side. Step into it and fly to the king's palace. If you meet anyone on the way, take him with you." The simpleton thanked the mannequin very kindly, bade him farewell, and went into the road. When he got to the first tree, he stopped in front of it, did everything just as he had been told, and, kneeling on the ground with his face to the earth, fell asleep. After a little time, he was aroused. He awoke and, rubbing his eyes, saw a ready-made ship at his side, and at once got into it. And the ship rose and rose, and in another minute was flying through the air, when the simpleton, who was on the lookout, cast his eyes down to the earth and saw a man beneath him on the road, who was kneeling with his ear upon the damp ground. "Hello," he called out. "What are you doing down there?" "I am listening to what is going on in the world," replied the man. "Come with me in my ship," said the simpleton. So the man was only too glad, and got in beside him, and the ship flew and flew and flew through the air, till again, from his outlook, the simpleton saw a man on the road below, who was hopping on one leg, while his other leg was tied up behind his ear. So he hailed him, calling out, "Hello! What are you doing, hopping on one leg?" "I can't help it," replied the man. "I walk so fast that unless I tied up one leg, I should be at the end of the earth in a bound." "Come with us on my ship," he answered. And the man made no objections, but joined them. And the ship flew on and on and on, till suddenly the simpleton, looking down on the road below, beheld a man aiming with a gun into the distance. "Hello," he shouted to him. "What are you aiming at? As far as I can see, there is no bird in sight." "What would be the good of my taking a near shot?" replied the man. "I can hit beast or bird at 100 miles distance. That is the kind of shot I enjoy." "Come into the ship with us," answered the simpleton. And the man was only too glad to join them, and he got in, and the ship flew on, farther and farther, till again the simpleton from his outlook saw a man on the road below, carrying on his back a basket full of bread. And he waved to him, calling out, "Hello! where are you going?" "To fetch bread for my breakfast." "Bread? Why, you have got a whole basket load of it on your back." "That's nothing," answered the man. "I should finish that in one mouthful." "Come along with us in my ship, then." And so the glutton joined the party, and the ship mounted again into the air, and flew up and onward, till the simpleton, from his outlook, saw a man walking by the shore of a great lake, and evidently looking for something. "Hello," he cried to him. "What are you seeking?" "I want water to drink. I'm so thirsty," replied the man. "Well, there's a whole lake in front of you. Why don't you drink some of that?" "Do you call that enough?" answered the other. "Why, I should drink it up in one gulp." "Well, come with us in the ship." And so the mighty drinker was added to the company, and the ship flew farther, and even farther, till again the simpleton looked out, and this time he saw a man dragging a bundle of wood, walking through the forest beneath them. "Hello!" he shouted to him. "Why are you carrying wood through a forest?" "This is not common wood," answered the other. "What sort of wood is it, then?" said the simpleton. "If you throw it upon the ground," said the man, "it will be changed into an army of soldiers." "Come into the ship with us, then." And so he too joined them, and away the ship flew on, and on, and on. And once more the simpleton looked out, and this time he saw a man carrying straw upon his back. "Hello, where are you carrying that straw to?" "To the village," said the man. "Do you mean to say there is no straw in the village?" "Ah, but this is quite a peculiar straw. If you strew it about even in the hottest summer, the air at once becomes cold, and snow falls, and the people freeze." Then the simpleton asked him also to join them. At last the ship, with its strange crew, arrived at the king's court. The king was having his dinner, but he at once dispatched one of his courtiers to find out what the huge, strange new bird could be that had come flying through the air. The courtier peeped into the ship, and seeing what it was, instantly went back to the king and told him that it was a flying ship, and that it was manned by a few peasants. Then the king remembered his royal oath, but he made up his mind that he would never consent to let the princess marry a poor peasant. So he thought and thought, and then said to himself, "I will give him some impossible tasks to perform. That will be the best way of getting rid of him." And he there and then decided to dispatch one of his courtiers to the simpleton, with the command that he was to fetch the king the healing water from the world's end before he had finished his dinner. But while the king was still instructing the courtier exactly what he was to say, the first man of the ship's company, the one with the miraculous power of hearing, had overheard the king's words and hastily reported them to the poor simpleton. "Alas, alas," he cried, "what am I to do now? It would take me quite a year, possibly my whole life, to find the water." "Never fear," said his fleet-footed comrade. "I will fetch what the king wants." Just then, the courtier arrived, bearing the king's command. "Tell his majesty," said the simpleton, "that his orders shall be obeyed." And forthwith the swift runner unbound the foot that was strung up behind his ear and started off, and in less than no time had reached the world's end and drawn the healing water from the well. "Dear me," he thought to himself, "that's rather tiring. I'll just rest for a few minutes. It will be some little time yet before the king has got to dessert." So he threw himself down on the grass, and as the sun was very dazzling, he closed his eyes, and in a few seconds had fallen sound asleep. In the meantime, all the ship's crew were anxiously awaiting him. The king's dinner would soon be finished, and their comrade had not yet returned. So the man with the marvelous quick hearing lay down and, putting his ear to the ground, listened. "That's a nice sort of fellow," he suddenly exclaimed. "He's lying on the ground, snoring hard." At this, the marksman seized his gun, took aim, and fired in the direction of the world's end in order to awaken the sluggard. And a moment later, the swift runner reappeared, and stepping on board the ship, handed the healing water to the simpleton. So while the king was still sitting at table, finishing his dinner, news was brought to him that his orders had been obeyed to the letter. What was to be done now? The king determined to think of a still more impossible task, so he told another courtier to go to the simpleton with the command that he and his comrades were instantly to eat up 12 oxen and 12 tons of bread. Once more, the sharp-eared comrade overheard the king's words while he was still talking to the courtier, and reported them to the simpleton. "Alas, alas," he sighed. "What in the world shall I do? Why, it would take us a year, possibly our whole lives, to eat up 12 oxen and 12 tons of bread." "Never fear," said the glutton. "It will scarcely be enough for me. I'm so hungry." So when the courtier arrived with the royal message, he was told to take back word to the king that his orders should be obeyed. Then 12 roasted oxen and 12 tons of bread were brought alongside of the ship, and at one sitting, the glutton had devoured it all. "I call that a small meal," he said. "I wish they'd brought me some more." Next, the king ordered that 40 casks of wine, containing 40 gallons each, were to be drunk up on the spot by the simpleton and his party. When these words were overheard by the sharp-eared comrade and repeated to the simpleton, he was in despair. "Alas, alas," he exclaimed, "what is to be done? It would take us a year, possibly our whole lives, to drink so much." "Never fear," said his thirsty comrade. "I'll drink it all up at a gulp. See if I don't." And sure enough, when the 40 casks of wine containing 40 gallons each were brought alongside of the ship, they disappeared down the thirsty comrade's throat in no time. And when they were empty, he remarked, "Why, I'm still thirsty. I should have been glad of 2 more casks." Then the king took counsel with himself and sent an order to the simpleton that he was to have a bath in a bathroom at the royal palace, and after that the betrothal should take place. Now the bathroom was built of iron, and the king gave orders that it was to be heated to such a pitch that it would suffocate the simpleton. And so, when the poor, silly youth entered the room, he discovered that the iron walls were red hot. But fortunately, his comrade with the straw on his back had entered behind him, and when the door was shut upon them, he scattered the straw about, and suddenly the red-hot walls cooled down, and it became so very cold that the simpleton could scarcely bear to take a bath, and all the water in the room froze. So the simpleton climbed up upon the stove, and, wrapping himself up in the bath blankets, lay there the whole night. And in the morning, when they opened the door, there he lay, sound and safe, singing cheerfully to himself. Now when this strange tale was told to the king, he became quite sad, not knowing what he should do to get rid of so undesirable a son-in-law, when suddenly a brilliant idea occurred to him. "Tell the rascal to raise me an army, now at this instant," he exclaimed to one of his courtiers. "Inform him at once of this, my royal will." And to himself he added, "I think I shall do for him this time." As on former occasions, the quick-eared comrade had overheard the king's command and repeated it to the simpleton. "Alas, alas," he groaned, "now I am quite done for." "Not at all," replied one of his comrades, the one who had dragged the bundle of wood through the forest. "Have you quite forgotten me?" In the meantime, the courtier, who had run all the way from the palace, reached the ship panting and breathless, and delivered the king's message. "Good," remarked the simpleton. "I will raise an army for the king." And he drew himself up. "But if, after that, the king refuses to accept me as his son-in-law, I will wage war against him and carry the princess off by force." During the night, the simpleton and his comrade went together into a big field, not forgetting to take the bundle of wood with them, which the man spread out in all directions, and in a moment a mighty army stood upon the spot, regiment on regiment of foot and horse soldiers. the bugles sounded, and the drums beat, the chargers neighed, and their riders put their lances in rest, and the soldiers presented arms. In the morning, when the king awoke, he was startled by these warlike sounds, the bugles, and the drums, and the clatter of the horses, and the shouts of the soldiers. And stepping to the window, he saw the lances gleam in the sunlight, and the armor and weapons glitter. And the proud monarch said to himself, "I am powerless in comparison with this man." So he sent him royal robes and costly jewels, and commanded him to come to the palace to be married to the princess. And his son-in-law put on the royal robes, and he looked so grand and stately that it was impossible to recognize the poor simpleton. So changed was he. And the princess fell in love with him as soon as ever she saw him. Never before had so grand a wedding been seen, and there was so much food and wine that even the glutton and the thirsty comrade had enough to eat and drink.